Go. Okay. So I recently finished a rather large research project that's been ongoing for about a year, and so I'm trying to, obviously in 20 minutes, summarize the results and make it relevant to you, so we'll go pretty quickly. My perspective in research in general is that children have always been viewed as being in need of protection from the negative influences. The internet's no different. In fact, it's probably enhanced. The difference is that with the internet, paradoxically, young people are also perceived as the experts. At the same time, we're trying to protect them from the influence of it. So it's a new situation for media research. So historically, research has looked at what media does to children rather than thinking about what children do with media. And so that's the kind of work I try to do, to fill in where there's a lack of empirical evidence about how they use it, how they maintain communities and identity and all that sort of thing. So what's needed then, or what this represents, is an attempt to reconceptualize the relationship between youth and new media, taking youth seriously in their participation in new media, and how it's relevant to this group is that youth tend to be excellent indicators of future trends. I did an activities-based study with 11 participants, ages 13 to 17. I used Moray software, which is used for usability testing for websites, but turned out to be an excellent research tool. And here I'll give you a short example of the interface and then the kind of recordings that I get.
I love.
Oh, that happened.
I like loving my statuses because people are like freaking out. I love people's reactions to my statuses because no matter what, I always have like a comment or a little like symbol. I feel loved. I don't know why. I mean, I don't know, whatever. When people like your status, it's just kind of like,
I know, or when they comment on it, I'm like,
well, I love it when there's like 20 comments on my status. I'm just like, I'm so cool. People actually care.
So given that we have 20 minutes, I won't spend the time going through it, but there was about 20 different things going on that, in terms of coding in that one brief example. So the results that I think are pertinent to this group is that there is an ontological shift with our relationship with media, with new media, that needs to be considered. That has ramifications for social communities, which I summarize as social ties, and then I'll go into the implications for higher education. Why am I hearing? Oh, I'm not hearing myself, am I? It's like an echo. So the leitmotif or the organizing pattern that I found going through all of this was that every young person used things in very unique ways, but the one thing that sort of overarching pattern that emerged that was common across all of them is this correlation between communication channels and social relationships. So, and that has basically two dimensions: the level of intimacy or immediacy of the communication channel, and then the social affiliation. So this is an example of a chart that I created to try to explain that. And what I discovered is there was a hierarchy of telephone communication, cell phone communication, textual communication in online environments like Facebook and that kind of thing, and then email. And the level of priority and the immediacy or intimacy of those, there was a direct proportion there. Further, I noticed that who they talked to on those, there was also what I called originally affiliations, and then I went back to the research and discovered there's a whole field called social ties, but that pretty much they always talk to the same kind of people with each of the different media channels. In other words, close friends, immediate family were always texting or talking on the cell phone, that kind of thing. And then weaker ties, school peers, neighborhood friends, extended adult family, aunts and uncles, that kind of thing, were tended to be talked to in this group, never talked to in that group. And then email was exclusively for teachers, coaches, bosses, strangers. So you can kind of see where this is going in terms of higher education.
What was CL?
I'm sorry?
The first one was cell phone?
It's actually, I originally started with cell phone, but then I caught so much offline conversation. Like you heard that the girl in that clip was talking to a friend of hers who was off camera, that I put in offline conversation, and then cellular engagement, and then textual engagement, you know, typing status updates and that kind of thing. So the shift in the media ontology is represented best. Media is always, the goal has always been to increase the sense of presence, the sense of being there. And that's the point of larger and larger screens on your television, larger and larger screens in the film theaters, go into the virtual reality and the virtual reality caves and that kind of thing. So the goal has always been to increase the sense of presence. What's changing with social media is the goal is no longer that, it's to increase the co-presence, the sense of being with somebody versus the sense of being there. And that has some, I think, interesting ramifications. These are all the thoughts that came out of that chart that I just showed you. The other thing that I found that I had stepped into is a centuries-old debate about how large-scale social chains affect social ties between friends, neighbors, family, schools, that kind of thing. And it appears to me that social media qualifies as a large social change because of that ontological shift and that sort. So indeed, the meaning of friend is being redefined. When writing up the results, I found that interesting that I suddenly was trying to say they're offline friends and they're online friends, and how did I make that distinction? And that suddenly that distinction was blurring, and online friends could be people they wouldn't talk to offline, you know, necessarily, and it became very confusing. So one of the many reasons that social change is underway, I think. And so how to conceptualize that shift? Mark Granovetter in 1973 proposed something called social network theory, in which he was looking at offline relationships, particularly in the context of businesses, you know, people, organizational communication, interpersonal communication in businesses. And same thing, he decided that he developed the theory that all relationships are social, but that all relationships aren't created equal. There's different levels of relationships. And so he was interested in trying to quantify that. How do you establish guidelines for that? And so it's a range of strong ties to weak ties. Strong ties are trusted friends, close family, people whose social circles significantly overlap yours. In other words, people that you know very well. Weak ties are loose acquaintances, school friends, and so on, and they only partially overlap your social circles. But it turns out, Mark discovered, that those weak ties are extremely important. So it's coming out of organizational communication literature, but he found that that's how you find jobs, for example. Your sister's not going to find you a job, but somebody you don't know very well in another company, that's the person that's going to find you a job. So that's where those weak ties turned out to be incredibly important. Weak social ties in society. Indeed, your plumber, your car mechanic, these are all people that you can't survive without, even though you wouldn't call them friends, right? So they're all exceedingly important in society. A guy named, I'm sorry?
You're saying that the weakest ties, the job opportunities, in this literature say that the job opportunities come from the weakest ties?
Right. I mean, that's just an example of why it's valuable. They found that it allowed people to think more creatively, think outside the box because they had influences outside of their immediate circle, you know, those kinds of advantages as well. What's his name? Because I had to switch computers, I don't have my notes anymore, so I'm going off of memory. Barry Wellman, researcher in the 80s in Canada, did a lot of pioneering work in applying social ties to social media networks. And he found that social ties, strong ties, did not appear to be significantly influenced by using social media. The reason it being simply that they were people that were close to you, you had other ways to communicate with them. So if you didn't have social media, you would call them on the phone, or you'd walk across the street and say hello or whatever. But he did find that social network sites do enhance and increase contact among weaker ties in online communities as well as offline communities. So social networking sites have a significant impact on both online but also your offline community. So that leads one to believe that social networking sites are particularly well suited to enable broad networks of weak tie relationships. In other words, it's the weak ties that make social media social. not the strong ties, which is an interesting revolution on my part. That creates there are some tensions that are created by that. And this is the tensions that kind of have to be overcome, I think, to integrate this more, or to integrate it better in higher education, any kind of education. Unlike real life, there's less control over personal information in online environments because you have the one-size-fits-all binary. Either you're a friend or you're not. So that does not account for these differences in social ties that have been proven to be exceedingly important in society. Youth actually, there's the feeling that youth are willing to put anything online and there's nothing that's private anymore. In fact, what I found is that they're exceedingly concerned about the control of information, flow of information about themselves. It's that the architectures of the site are what's inhibiting those facts because they can't, you have the strong tie relationships. Those are your close friends, people you like to talk to, but that's also your parents, isn't it? And you want to say something to your close friends that you don't want your parents to hear. Facebook has no real way to control that. Conversely, weak tie relationships, you can talk to your peers. Of course, your close friends and parents are also listening, right, on the same channel. But also what's called consequential strangers. It's a new concept that Mary Blau has come up with that talks about these, again, the plumber, the car mechanic, people that are essentially strangers in your life, but essential to everyday life. And so maintaining some kind of contact with them is important. But so these strangers, do they sit in your network along and listen to the same messages that your parents are hearing and that kind of thing? So this is where the tension comes from. And I think the way I've noticed that Facebook has started to implement some ways to group your friends and control what you're seeing, but it's not by default, and nobody's using it as far as I can tell. At least nobody in this study was using those options, and they're kind of hidden, down deep in the interface. But I think it's the way, it's contrary to what Facebook's trying to do. They want to expand it so that everybody sees everything, where at the same time youth are trying to control the flow of information, and they want more and more control than is being provided by the interface. So strategies that youth use then, going back to the chart that I put together, is that they essentially are using communication channels that are appropriate for each level, social level. They choose texting and chat with their intimate friends, but then they switch to direct or indirect messaging to their peer communities, because those are one-to-one communication, channels. Peer community is wall posts, because those are one-to-many communication channels across Facebook. Email for, again, right down at the bottom, for the people that they don't want on their facial or don't have on their network, or communications with businesses, that kind of thing. The only thing youth used email for mostly in this study was for identification purposes. When you set up an account, they send an email and then you have to respond to that email. That's pretty much all they used it for. They move easily and seamlessly between them. They're working and they're chatting with somebody, they're texting somebody, they're chatting 2 or 3 people at a time, they're cruising through photo albums while they're waiting for the next chat session to begin. And so, and there was a lot of use of what I call anonymous identification sites like FormSpring and Yahoo.com, where kids would go and again take advantage of these consequential strangers. They would ask questions of help with boyfriends, issues about self-esteem, issues about being overweight. How do you deal with that? Things that they probably didn't feel comfortable talking about within their social network, so they would go to these consequential strangers. Again, expressing, noting how important weak ties are and how social media is really expanding the opportunities to make contact with those weak ties. Mm-hmm. It's a kind of a silly site where people can ask you questions and then you answer them. That's really all it is. But you don't have to identify yourself when you ask the question. So it may be somebody you know, it may not be somebody you know. And you can ask questions as well, anonymously or with your name attached.
You have to log in and give your email and all that.
You don't have, you probably have to do that to create the account, but you don't have, you can remain anonymous while you're answering questions or asking questions if you choose to. So the implication, the head slap moment that came to me while I was putting this together was social media is social. You know, we tend to think of it media as media, but as I said, there's an ontological shift going on. Media is no longer a passive experience, an active experience, and so it's become very social. It's interactive rather than one-way communication, so it's that building that sense of co-presence, being with people. Social networking is like joining a conversation more than presenting information, and or starting a conversation that you think, as we're moving towards the implication for higher education, it's about joining a conversation that's ongoing or starting a conversation that you think youth would be interested in. If they're not interested, they won't participate. It's like herding cats, I think. And this conversation is increasingly mobile. It's on the go. I was surprised how many students or how many young people in the study reported that it was kind of nice having a laptop, but they usually do all this stuff on their cell phone. Several of them said that. So that has ramifications for the kind of media you put out there. Traditional websites don't work well on mobile phones, right? You need either websites that are specifically designed for mobile access or media that that can be downloaded that's specifically designed for mobile access. So how to identify the best communication channels? Interestingly, there was evidence from several different clues that despite the supposed overwhelming evidence that they love social networking, they actually prefer face-to-face communication if they had a choice. They all had it for 7 days, each of the people that participated in the study, so it was always over a weekend. And each time they logged on to, say, Facebook or one of the other sites, it would be what I called an episode. And the number of episodes during the week was in the 40s, 50s, whereas on weekends it would drop down to 5, 6, or 7. So you can speculate as to why they weren't online on weekends, but what seemed to me is that they were out and about and not either accessing on their phone while they're hanging out with friends or preferring to hang out with their friends. If they're with their friends, they didn't need to communicate with them on Facebook. On the other hand, so social networking is co-present, it's interaction. Its closest analogy, if you think about it, is kids hanging out on a street corner. And does a business or a school or one of the kids' professors, do you really want to be seen as hanging out in their street corner with them? That would seem kind of invasive and maybe a little stalkery, right? A word that the kids that used in this study, and actually named one of the sections about being stalkery. So, I think the perception is, and I'm speculating now at this point, that they wouldn't want their professors hanging around in malls and on street corners with them. That's what classrooms and emails for, right? So on the other hand, though, we want to be able to reach young people in ways that they're through communication channels that interest them, right? So the perception generally is that students will tolerate it for convenience sake, right? It's convenient to them to get this information on their cell phone through their social media sites or however you choose to interact. And I think this is a really good segue to what, as I understand it, what the other two people are talking about. But it requires understanding the quantity and types of information they want. In other words, you can't supply huge amounts of information to somebody's cell phone, so you have to take that into account. And the types of information, do they really want 40-page reading assignment on their cell phone? Probably not. But would they want a message that class was canceled? Probably. And all that stuff, as I said, needs to be available through social media networks and on mobile devices. So that's my 20 minutes, I hope. Any questions? Mm-hmm.
One connection, Susan Brower sent out an email yesterday with that Horizons report. And I think it'd be interesting for everybody to see that. What it did was it talked about what's going to happen next year, 2 years, 5 years down the road, what kind of technology is going to come up. And one of the things it mentioned was the increasing importance of mobile devices. And so we got a laptop and certainly a desktop, or old tech, low tech. So You know, so what does that mean for our teaching? But I think maybe to put that on the CFI's website or something like that, I think would be really interesting. And that was one of the things it said.
Yep, I concurs with some of the things that I ran across.
When you say the youth still like face-to-face, does that include the new face-to-face technology when you can, or you mean?
I speculate in that when I write about this that video chat's going to be the next hot thing, probably replacing Facebook and those kinds of things. In fact, several of the people in the study went out of their way to load video chat on the test laptop computer so they could use it. That was their favorite form of communication, apparently.
Again, Apple is ahead of the game with this new, I guess, iPhone with the
FaceTime, right. The only catch with FaceTime is you can only talk to other people with the iPhone 4.
It's a start. Yeah.
Patricia.
Mm-hmm.
This may be more with the next group of people, but I guess I'm struggling with how you incorporate it in your classroom. I mean, I'd be curious, how many of you have self-free zone as in your classroom? And,
Yeah.
you know, how do you deal with the fact that they're texting and not listening, or do you incorporate it in the lecture, or how do we deal with that?
And also, how do you make use of it outside the classroom and classes?
One of the most interesting phenomena is what they call back channeling now, which is people sitting in the classroom or in a lecture or something like that, texting about that, not just to each other, but to Twitter, so that people that aren't here can follow what's going on. And I've always thought one of the most interesting things to do would be to create a Twitter account, for example, for the class, and people can say submit questions, and they would pop up on the screen as your tweets went by, and that would be an interesting way to interact.
There's a professor at Penn State who's been doing that.
I
for a few
suspect, yeah.
years, and, he finds it really useful. The students sort of create new conversations, and he can incorporate them into his lecture.
Mm-hmm.
Are they anonymous? Because in discussions, I know students sometimes are worried about speaking up. And I would imagine that this would provide a way for them to throw out a question when they feel a little sheepish about
Right.
something embarrassing themselves. I'm curious about that. Does it identify them?
We create an anonymous login that says,
Right.
I'll show you an example in here in a bit, but like one of my students has Bugbox is 21. No one has any idea who Bugbox is 21.
Okay.
So that might be a way to ground them.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I do think, I mean, it's all interesting, but I think, you know, if any of us think that most of our students, when they are texting in class, are texting about engaging in intellectual questions that we have inspired them to do, you know, we're not quite in the social network game. And I mean, I think what's really intriguing about it, so students, I mean, or people surveyed may say that yes, they prefer face-to-face time, but what I find so intriguing with our students, and it doesn't matter if it's Loyola students, I think it's quite universal, what they're really doing is redefining what it means to be present. I find it incredible. If you walk into your class, walk quietly, just peek in there what they're doing. They're sort of chatting with one another, but they're on their phones. Say, who you're texting? I'm my roommate. It's like, wow. I mean, you're in a group of your peers with no old person there, but you'd still rather text than engage. So I think what this is doing, for better or worse, I don't know if it's good or bad, but they're redefining what being present means. And I think you know, when you can have phone conversations where there's, you know, through your iPhone. I mean, my niece was just explaining that this is all very important. I was like, why? She's like, because, you know, people want to see me when they talk to me. I was like, wow, okay, leave me off that, sister. But, you know, I mean, it was a very sort of different way that she, as a young person, is defining present in a relationship, which I guess I'm really absent of it all, but it's interesting.
Right. Well, the concept of copresence that I said here doesn't suggest they have to be in the same room by any means.
But that's interesting.
Yeah.
That they don't.
Right. That's
Be
not
present.
necessary.
Yeah.
Oh, I was just gonna, this just happened yesterday. I walked into my first year seminar and 4 or 5 students they use their computers and they have all their books online, they
Yeah.
have e-copies, and one student in the back, she was doing this like that, and I said, hang up. You know, right when we were just getting started, she's like, oh, I'm sorry, I haven't seen him in a while, and her boyfriend's in Sweden or something like that. And I was like, well, hang up or he's going to partake in class. And she said, oh, can he? And I said, if he wants to, you got to turn the computer around though. And so she did. She turned the computer around, and there was his talking head, and he sat in on my class. Right? And she felt like that was going to keep them more connected, because they hadn't seen each other in so long, so that they could share.
He is
class
engaging in
together.
her life
Right.
virtually.
And I let it go because she wasn't talking to him anymore. He was just sitting there. It was a little weird.
It's interesting.
Right.
It's similar to seeing a movie with strangers, going to a movie theater and being alone but present with other people. And I think this isn't a new phenomenon so much. A new way of expressing it and enhancing it.
But how they're defining that, I think, is different, because I don't go to the movie theater and say I went to the movies with, 200 of my closest friends. But I think how they identify these people online or this or that, it is really who their friends are.
And they're simultaneously ignoring the people they are in the room with, like,
Yeah.
as if they were in the movies.
Well, people go to the movie and chat with their friends and whisper and you know, I'm not saying it's exactly the same thing. I'm not trying to make that claim, but I think that we who did not grow up with social media have experienced this to some extent, and the kids aren't that different from us. It's not that crazy, you know. And I actually have a question that's a little different than this. At the very beginning, you talked about how children are often seen as the experts on the technology, which intuitively I agree with, but I also intuitively think that concept has changed a little bit, in that at one point they were considered the people who knew how to use the technology the best and find it the best. I don't think that's so much the case anymore, as that they are using it in ways that we haven't conceived of. Would you say that your study has confirmed that in some way, or am I just making stuff up?
I didn't have any relationship with the parents, for example, to do some kind of comparative analysis, but they all seem very willing to figure out how to do things. You know, experimentation seems to be how they learn, and they're very willing to spend the time to experiment, where I think adults still aren't at that point, right? We have other responsibilities, and so I suspect they're still quite far ahead of us.
My experience with my students is kind of the opposite. They're very part. They know how to use Facebook and YouTube very well. They're very satisfied with the small environment that they live in. Yes, they make a lot of use out of that, and they're actually innovating on that in the way they tell their stories, the way they create narratives of their lives and all that stuff. But they don't. It's almost they take for granted that this is the platform and that's it. And they're doing all these things that could move to other platforms, that other platforms even serve already, and they just don't seem to care.
Yeah, Brian had students in a class all agree that we had gone as far regarding communication and writing as anyone would ever go. Right? Like there was nothing else, even though in their lifetime all these social media had been developed and all these ways of communicating had been developed. They thought that was it. That's the height of technology. Like, I don't understand how that's even possible. If they're willing to experiment, how is it possible to think that there's nothing beyond what you can see right now, what's been branded and handed to you? But they all agree, unanimously.
But don't you think that's generational to a certain extent too? Because some of these whiz kids now are older, and some of them have children. You know, so the generations moved up a little bit for those who, I mean, I'm the old crowd, but people younger than me, all the assistant professors around here, use a whole lot more media in class than I do. The students are using it in another way. I mean, I think each generation has its niche for what they're doing with it.
Sure. I just know, I mean, I have to teach kids how to do stuff. And it's surprising how much I have to teach them. They should be teaching me by the standards that we all accept as you know, the kids, they know how to use this stuff. I have to explain the most basic things to my mind, to show them that very simple things exist on the internet that could satisfy their needs. They haven't even made the step to find. So
Which is
I
a
think
whole separate
I do.
problem. And they don't even go
Yeah.
to where the information is.
And I do think that the interesting story, and this is the intuitive thing I was talking about, is it's not so much, okay, well, they're finding all the new technology and they're going to leave us in the dust in like a couple of days, but they're finding really interesting ways to use a small amount of technology now. They're making Facebook do stuff that Facebook didn't think would be its main use. You know, they're doing all this kind of curation, distribution, and news aggregating, and you know, I mean, this isn't just kids, but adults as well. They're creating streams of media curation that we hadn't even conceived of before, and that's what's interesting. Not so much the technology that they're using, but the way that they're using this small.
Now that's pretty current thinking in this area is that the architecture of the sites shape their practices, but at the same time their practices are influencing the architecture of the site.
Yeah, and I think it might be like the computer itself, where the computer, you know, we get these computers and they're designed to do 2 billion things, and most people use them for email, adults. And now checking Facebook. But now we've got these more purpose devices that we use. We got the iPod was such a revolution in that it just was this computer that just did this one thing. It turns out a lot of people wanted just that one thing. It didn't do something that the computer didn't do. It just only did that thing. And that's what was so special about it. And I feel like Facebook is sort of that, is what the computer was. It allows you to do all this junk, and people are doing all that junk, and it kind of comes in this noisy flow. But may see some things break out from that. Okay, everybody obviously wants to do this. Shouldn't there be an application just for that?
Well, that I think relates to the Wired magazine a few months ago came out with the headline blazoned across it, "The internet is dead."
Yeah.
And that's exactly what they were referring to. Rather than people exploring the internet, they're all going to Facebook and then exploring Facebook. So that, you know, the web is dead is what their claim was.
They talked about apps, that you get an app for your phone to do that one thing that you would normally have used a web browser for in the past. Now, you don't have to Google something, you just hit that button that looks like the thing that you want on your phone, and then it opens it up, and just do that one. I don't mean to monopolize the conversation.
We're going to continue to have conversation after Janelle and Chris present and share what they've been doing. And then I'm going to let Janelle and Chris have the floor.
Okay, well, we're hoping that this will be about 10 minutes, 15 minutes tops, because we're much more interested to hear questions and comments and suggestions and things from everybody else. So, what's that? iPad, everybody knows it's an iPad. So we're teaching a Team Talk course, myself, Chris, and what? Myself, Chris, and Robert Bell are teaching a Team Talk course on digital media using the device of the iPad. And when iPad launched this device, oh shit, you did. So we're going to start over because he was going to start.
That's okay. Collaborative presentations. We try to encourage a lot of collaborative writing and presenting in our course, and we try to demonstrate that to our students by fumbling our way through it.
Big hot mess in the beginning.
But it's a really good learning example for them. So teaching this class on the iPad, and when it was launched last year, one of the slogans was, "You already know how to use it." And this was curious to us, and we wanted to ask our students, do they already know how to use it? Do we know how to use it? This seemed to be updating what Mark Prensky wrote in 2001 in an article called "Digital Natives, Digital Immigrants," which was that our students today are all native speakers of the digital language of computers, video games, and the internet. They are digital natives. So Apple seemed to be confirming this. We all already know how to use the iPad. But Mark Prensky had also said that, well, what does that make the rest of us in 2001? Those of us who were not born with in the digital world, but have at some later point in our lives become fascinated by and adopted many or most aspects of the new technology are, and always will be, compared to them, digital immigrants. This seemed to be what was somewhat at stake in our earlier conversation. Some people are digital natives, some are digital immigrants. Well, Apple's saying everyone's more like a digital native now.
Except we actually came to find out that we can't assume anyone knows anything about digital media. In fact, we found that most of our students who we thought were the most plugged in were in fact the least interested in digital media in some cases. What's more, we also found that even the most tech-savvy students were often unaware of how to engage critically with the new media. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we use some of the new media pedagogically in our classes. Both Chris and I use Blogger. We have students working on my blogs. Are your blogs open to the public?
Yes.
Okay, so both of our blogs are open to anybody who wants to enter into the conversation, but they're run, for me, they're run primarily by my students. So I actually don't have any further presence than setting the blog up for them. What I found out, though, when I started this, something like, I don't know, Bob, what you were saying, where they actually didn't know how to use Blogger at all. And so I was learning at the same time, because I kind of assumed they were going to teach me. And so we had to teach them how to use it, but also how to actually talk on it, so to speak, right? And what it means to write on it. Like, do you use LOL on a blogger, or do you actually write complete sentences with spell check and all these kinds of things? So I've used it in my first year seminar, and it's still running now. What I actually did this semester was continue to blog from my old first year seminar from last year, and I just had the students continue the blog so they can see all of last time's comments and recordings, and then they can build on those. And it's a space largely completely safe. They can take all the risks they want. They're not graded on exactly what they're saying. They're graded on the frequency of what they say, right? So they need to comment so many times. They need to post original posts so many times. And it's a place where it's all their voice. They feel safe about it. They can take risks with their ideas. And it's sort of self-mediated by the students. Every once in a while, I'll chime in with comments. But I do tell them that I don't referee this site, that this is for you, and you decide how you want to use it. So one of the ones I also have used it for was an experimental course I taught last semester, which is green literature. And in this course, we actually had 2 course blogs, because some of my students from previous courses demanded that we had blogs as part of the system of the course. So this is an Eater's Manual blog. It follows, if you can see the About Us on the side, it follows Michael Pollan's food rules. You know about Michael Pollan, he has those specific rules, like eat your colors, that kind of stuff. So it follows those, and it was an experiment we were running, and the students kept track of their experiment on how they could or could not follow these food rules, for example, on this blog. And then they actually took it a step further on their own and emailed Michael Pollan to say, look, we're doing this experiment. Do you want to get involved? And he emailed them back. And they had a running conversation for just like 3 or 4 days. I mean, nothing huge. But he did respond to them, and that kind of wowed them. And they saw that he was participating on the blog, and that was amazing. And then you can see this is sort of on the last day or after the last day of class last semester, and they're talking about how this is extending beyond the class. It was a nice space where they felt they could go back to and keep sort of engaged with one another. So, and I know you use it differently.
Yeah, so I just have a different model for using blogs in the English classroom, but I think it's pretty applicable to most college classrooms. I started teaching with blogs because I wanted a break from grading papers and having that terrible neck pain that happens after grading so many papers. So I said, well, I'm going to do a class where I require every student to start a blog, and every student will be graded entirely on what they write on their blogs. I thought this would save me a lot of time and effort, and I thought it'd be good for them to learn how to write professionally and rigorously in a public, open forum. So they were graded on their posts as well as their comments on each other's blogs. This ended up being about 1,000 times more work than grading regular papers, because what happens is it's infectious, and they get so excited, and the recursive writing and commenting is amazing. It also takes quite a bit more work from the instructor to not police it, but to set a high standard. I would also keep my own blog, and I would synthesize and integrate their blogs and posts. But it ended up being a lot more work, but it was very exciting. And I think one of the most rewarding aspects was seeing them take these public spaces seriously as spaces for writing and expression. And I accomplished that, I think, by telling them that this is where their whole grade was going to rest, other than their class participation, of course. But this was all of their writing would take place on the blog, so they immediately took it seriously. So that has been one of my attempts at using blogs. It's a lot to keep track of too, just 20 different blogs and but you can build in activities like pairing up students so that they're reading and commenting on each other's, and then they hold each other accountable.
And then if you really get involved, you can put it on your RSS feed so you know when they post new things instead of having to search through where all the new posts are. You can just depend on your engagement. But I think one of the, if we're going with the title of this talk today, one of the possibilities, I think, is extending the conversation beyond the classroom, both before and after the class. So there's so much you can do in an hour and 15 minutes or 50 minutes, but the students can come in already having thought through their ideas and actually articulated them in writing somewhere. And that's one moment, and that's something you can pick up. And then after class, there's usually things left over that you didn't get to or they didn't get to, and then they can post it on the blog. So that would be a possibility, I suppose. And
one of the pitfalls is how do we relearn what good writing is when it's no longer a 5-page essay, but it's a 500-word post. What does that mean? And how do we come up with a rubric that then they can understand and put to use? I mean, I think we've probably all read a really good 500-word blog post, and we've probably read really bad ones. So that's a shift that has to take place, and there are pitfalls there just in terms of stylistics and habits. But it's a place where our students are active, even in a limited way, and it's a chance to add some analysis and rigor to that. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think this was mentioned already. Twitter. I use Twitter in my classes, particularly my romanticism classes, oddly enough. And some of you have heard the story before, but so the most basic, reduced, sort of faulty definition of romanticism is spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings recollected in tranquility. So recollected in tranquility would be the blog, because they have all of this time to focus and generate their ideas in as much space as they want. Twitter, you have 140 characters that you can post. And what I did was, this is your spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings, right? I mean, it was, I did that as a gimmick just to get them interested, but most, if not all of my students had never used Twitter, right? So it was again, I had to go in and teach them what Twitter is, what it means to post something with 140 characters, what's the point of using Twitter in this class? And to be honest, most of them were rolling their eyes at me, saying, ugh, now I have to use, I don't want to. I purposely was trying to stay away from Twitter because it's such a gimmick and it's so stupid and nobody wants to use it, and we just follow like J-Lo on it or something, right? But then as they started using it, what I've recognized is it was because they were limited and they didn't get to just kind of foam at the mouth, kind of like I'm doing right now. Because they didn't get to do that, they had to concisely ask a question or make a comment, and then that could or could not lead to it being picked up on the feed by somebody else, right, in the class. So I just have 4 examples here. So one of the students was talking about Rime of the Ancient Mariner. Another student posted something about Frankenstein. Another student, this was the mug boxes, which ironically enough has this picture on it, but and so then he was talking about a Shelley poem. And then this was the interesting one where this student actually didn't know what we were supposed to be doing, and since he didn't get email, he went to another source for the course and looked on Twitter to be like, can anyone tell me this? And then there were all these tweets saying, yeah, you gotta read this, or you gotta do this, or what are you, crazy? It's on Blackboard, she's gonna kill you, like that kind of thing, right? And so it was really nice because it forced them to come to class ready with a very, very concise statement of something about what they were reading for that day. As a result, now I would say, I think it's probably about 3/4 of these students that I had now all use Twitter all the time. And they use it for class and just to tweet each other about what they're doing in classes, or I'm having lunch, or I'm picking my nose, or whatever, right? So it's consistently used now as a result of having introduced it to them. So I do think we play a role in as much as on the back end, they start teaching us about how to use this. I know like Chris and I have noticed that now that we use blogs so much, some of our students actually come in and say, well, no, we should make like another page on the blog. And we're like, how do you do that? And they sit down and show us. So, they kind of overcome what we didn't know, and now they're smarter than we are, and they teach us. But we were the ones that have to get them to do it in the first place, and then they pick up things a little faster, I suppose. So that's how I use Twitter. I find it pretty helpful. And then the thing we wanted to end with was talking a little bit about Wikipedia as social media.
Yeah, we've just encountered the subject of Wikipedia. I'm sure we all have in various ways in the university. Janelle heard of a school recently that prohibits its students from citing Wikipedia. I don't think we do that here at wholesale, but I'm sure that many of us have had those debates with colleagues or with students. We in the English department, we recently did a search for a digital humanities scholar, and one of the candidates said, "I love Wikipedia. I think it's great. I really want my students to use it, but I tell them never to cite it." And I thought that's really interesting. I mean, we draw these interesting lines of what's appropriate, how we can like certain social media or new media technologies, but then what's the threshold for their acceptance or their use in thinking about pedagogy and learning. So we sort of wanted to put it out here. How would we think of Wikipedia as social media? It doesn't seem at first like one of the obvious forms of social media like Twitter or Facebook, or even the blogger that we've talked about today. But we wonder if one of the hang-ups about Wikipedia is that it does function as a kind of social media that might be seen as...
It depends on the interaction of voices to function, right?
And could be seen as a detriment to something like real learning or real research, but
or
also...
a credible source.
Yeah, but there are also maybe opportunities for using Wikipedia rigorously in the classroom or for assignments. So this is a very open ending.
We wanted to throw it out to you, actually. We'll show you what this whole talk actually looks like from a distance, just because it's cool. And then we'd like you guys to tell us what Wikipedia entry we should edit right now, live. Is there a Wikipedia entry that you feel is lacking? That you've read and that you say, God, why doesn't someone fix this? So let's fix it.
But you can.
That's what we're saying, so let's do it.
But a lot of people haven't done it, right?
Right.
I mean, we all sort of know,
Wikipedia,
but...
and then you're like, oh, that's so bad, or why doesn't someone fix it? And then you check your email and go,
I mean, how many of us in here have edited Wikipedia? Have edited a Wikipedia page? One person.
I assigned it to graduate students for their exam.
That's good.
Written exam.
Yeah, and I mean, I think I've done it in classes actually where I've had students go in and even a minor modification or an edit. Often you hear stories of, well, I don't use Wikipedia because I know people go in and sabotage it or write false. Well, I mean,
there's a peer review process that eventually that'll get rectified.
And often very soon.
You want one that's popular and gets re-edited quickly, or do you want one that's more obscure and...
It doesn't matter, just to
I don't...
really needs help.
Like one on Uyghurs?
Yeah, like Xinjiang, Xing.
Is there a quick edit we could make? Just like a little...
Like even a...
I can't think of one off the top of my head.
Well, let's just read it. What is this?
It'll be filled with
Xinjiang.
So this is a site obviously that your students might go to.
Yeah.
And if
Go
they
to the
edited
history
it,
section.
If they edited it, it would be re-edited within seconds. So
No,
if we
I don't
change-
think this
Well,
will
let's
be
see.
re-edited.
I mean, we could test that out very easily.
Yeah, we could see what happens.
And we have an expert here, right? And Ryan's students are quickly becoming maybe not experts, but more knowledgeable than a lot of people.
Okay, go down a little bit.
Okay.
Keep going.
Okay.
Go after the Hondas.
Ryan, you can even
Okay,
come.
okay.
Okay.
Now we're in trouble.
Okay. I mean, we're looking for something, pretty modest, like adding a sentence.
So just go up just above the top. Yeah. Okay. All right. So there should be a sentence in there that says something like, "After the fall of the Han, Xinjiang had virtually no connection to."
Well, come up here and type it.
Yeah.
Come up here and type it. Seriously.
thanks for humoring us, but we just felt like this is something that this could really be used in the classroom, even for one assignment in almost any subject.
This will probably take ages.
We could, but I really wonder why.
I think the Chinese government is going to change.
That's exactly it. That's what, if you search it, this is an ideological battle. This is not just a.
Well, yeah, but the question is also, why would you want to put false information in as a test?
I mean, if we're in the position to assign our students to put correct information in, that seems like an opportunity for us.
Can I ask a question about these doing that's not relevant to Wikipedia per se? From what I understand, in your classroom, all the students had iPads, right?
That's right.
In this particular class.
This particular class.
So they were blogging with iPads. They could have, it sounds like for the work that you did with them, they could have been using computers. They could have been using desktops, laptops.
They were,
And they were also.
So was there any look, I mean, there was a grant given to use iPads. Was there anything uniquely iPadian, as it were, about the way you used the iPads in your class?
That's a really important question, and Mary, you can correct us if we're wrong, because Mary has been sitting in the class, but I would say the iPad in this particular class, which is called Reading with the Digital Human, and we've been reading ebooks on the iPad, and we've been talking about what it means to read on an iPad or a Kindle for that matter, as opposed to a paper book. But in a lot of ways, the iPad has been a cultural product. We wanted them to think about the aura and the affect of the iPad. How does that change their modes of learning, expression, reading? So we've been asking, I think, more theoretical questions about how they relate to this device, not so much using it to make an app or do specific things with it.
But the students also, like last semester, they gave presentations because it's a year-long course. So last semester they gave presentations, and a few of them, most of them actually presented them through the iPad using various apps they found, whether it was a PowerPoint type presentation or pulling up PDFs or showing YouTube videos. And as a result of that, we were able to see the limitations of the iPad and the fact that it's such a new device and it actually doesn't have a lot of the capacities that a computer has, for example, or that even phones have. Right? So we started to butt up against sort of what it means to be on the leading edge of these technologies as opposed to maybe, exactly. So I think, but it is largely what Chris was saying, where we're really conceptualizing and theorizing what it means to have this kind of device and how that changes or doesn't our interactions. Right? Does that answer the question?
And you.
Yeah. About what your students have learned, it's just a really odd way I've interacted with y'all's class because I've never gone to it. I don't know really anything about it. And I don't use an iPad, but I was very intrigued from it by the beginning, and it just so happened the student of the class is a former student of mine, and I haven't told them this, but when the class first started in the fall, a kid comes by the office, with his new, beamy, shiny little new toy. I'm like, whoa. And so we sat in my office and we played with his Zen garden. And then a few weeks later, he said, this is great. It's like everything in life I don't need all in one place. But then as the semester went on, he would come by and say, oh, look at this blog. I mean, it's from him that I got that I started blogging in my class. Mm-hmm. And it was really amazing to see his transformation intellectually as he engaged with this technology. It was really amazing to watch, and for those of us who are sort of skeptical about what some of this technology does and how new media forms of which we interact, he would, not even meaning to.
Right.
Really,
well, and that's why
I was completely changed.
Yeah, I think in some ways we're doing a very informal study of looking at how the students are interacting with these devices, right?
Yeah,
and we actually
really
talk about it very transparently day to day in the classroom, right? That a lot of times, we'll start talking about an essay by Benjamin or something, and then by the time we're done, we're talking about an app that's supposed to tell you how to meditate. And then we talk about how to work the app, or where to get it, or how did you open that, or how did you close that, and then why would I want to use an app to meditate? and the discussions sort of cycle around in this really strange but productive manner. So.
But it's interesting that they're sort of having these conversations where they feel very comfortable
Right.
and sort of posing those to other faculty members. And so what's your hang up?
Because I think they know that we don't know much more than they do about the device.
But
Right.
whether it be a digital media or
Right.
a traditional form that we're comfortable, it's very interesting
Yeah.
to see them engaging that.
Yeah, and-
In the larger Loyola.
And get him to
Yeah.
think about it in terms of
Fabulous.
a process of acquisition, learning to become digitally literate in new ways, even with a simple, well, a $500 simple device, but just to see them really track how do they use it. It's really interesting. I would say over half of our students were against the iPad. They were not even excited about it. They actually would have preferred a Kindle or something.
At the beginning or
Yeah,
throughout?
at the beginning. Well, and I'd still say that half of them are healthily skeptical of what the iPad is for. Why? How is it really better than a laptop or a Kindle? I mean, we've really tried to sustain and cultivate their skepticism when it's correct. But also to see them learn how to use it and learn. I mean, I've had students in my class who take their notes on the iPad and they've adjusted, and it seems to have been actually a useful tool for them.
Well, a lot of the students that we have that overlap actually now, we have several students that are in different classes, not the iPad class, and they only use their iPad to take all of their notes.
And read.
And read, yeah.
And we're certainly not trying to promote the iPad here, but just, I mean, it really was almost an arbitrary choice for this class. We could have done it with a mobile device, like an iPhone or any number of them.
Mary?
I was just going to say, I was surprised how resistant they were to reading on these devices. They needed a book. They needed to turn the page. They're still doing that. We were reading an article last week on a guy who reviewed the iPad for the New Yorker, and he said, well, it's greenish, not the iPad, but the Kindle, and it's greenish gray, and when you turn the page, it goes black. I mean, he really just denigrated it. And I had my Kindle in the class, and I said, this is simply not true. This article is simply not true. And then one kid said, oh wait, I saw the black. I mean, I saw it go black before. And I said, yes, but how long was it? And when you turn a page, there's a point when you can't see either page.
We have these great conversations.
I mean, it's awful.
But we have these conversations about the phenomenology of reading that go all the way back to a paper book. But you can get them to ask those questions by looking at the details. And I do think that attentiveness to the media is then, we can extend that to.
And we talk a lot about interface and what that means, right?
I wanted to mention back on the Wikipedia thing, just something simple, and I don't know if this would change anybody's point of view towards it. I'm not trying to do that. But you mentioned that people are reluctant to use Wikipedia. And I think it's really important what we say using Wikipedia is, because I think the general idea is you use Wikipedia to get information, so you just read it. But Ryan just used it. Right? Wikipedia is more than just reading what's on there, but it is a platform for creating and updating and changing information. So
And what Ryan just did, I mean, that's, any one of our students could do that. And not just to be sneaky or crafty, but to actually contribute to knowledge production. I mean, it is something that we'll probably all use, our students all use, and it's something we can all contribute to.
It's a big deal in the Africanist world. Wikipedia advertises at Africanist conferences and we get MolePad notebooks from Wikipedia all the time because they want real people who know about Africa to write things about Africa, because every Africa entry is a stub. And so they actively try to recruit people at these things to write things about their subfields, because so few people participate in a real way.
I just think it presents a great opportunity for writing assignments, really short ones too. I mean, it could be like one sentence that actually improves an entry. And I think almost any subject, it could work across disciplines.
one of the problems that students have with not just things like Wikipedia, but with Twitter. And I have to confirm your experience with Twitter. I have the exact same experience. And students hate Twitter. And there's actually a blog that's, I can't remember the name, and I'm really sorry, but it's a blog that's maintained by basically 15-year-olds who write about technology. And there was a really eloquent post by them about social media that they like, and that Twitter was one that they do not like. And they see it as kind of the old person's thing. Like the old guy who suddenly discovered the internet and its power is the one who's excited about Twitter, not the kid. But once they start using it, it's good. Anyway, but all of these things is that they don't know what content to put up there.
Right.
It's actually a kind of fear more than anything. They don't evaluate it so much as a platform as much as, well, what am I going to do with it? And I think that's what you guys are helping them do.
Well, they get mad at me now because I don't keep up with my Twitter feed. And they're like, you haven't posted on your Twitter feed for like 6 months. And I was like, well, what am I supposed to say? I'm eating lunch? They're like, that's what I say.
Yeah.
He's like, I didn't realize that was of any interest, right? So it's sort of been turned back on me because once they got to post what I would call more substantial information, that gave them the comfort zone to then just use it. Whereas I just was like, well, okay, I'm done because I got nothing to say.
Yeah, you signed up so you could teach it or something like that, but it's not related to promote
Right.
anything. Yeah, yeah. But I've seen that. I've seen the students who were very resistant become some of the best tweeters out there.
Yeah.
You know, who really know how to use it, really pick up and innovate what the platform gives you, which is only a small amount, but it offers a lot of things.
And you have had students too who've used it to, for instance, keep in touch with a visiting scholar who was here, who also was on Twitter, and so students keep in touch with a scholar from the University of California.
In some ways, it made it more real that we were having visiting scholars because they had already tweeted with them or blogged with them. And so when they come here, they're like, oh, I know you, this is fantastic.
Yeah, you're at blah, blah, blah.
Right.
But it's not just Twitter, it's all these platforms.
Right.
It is filling, it's the question of what the content is. And because there's so much junk out there, and they recognize that there's so much
Well,
junk.
and students, I mean, what I ran into when I first did the Twitter stuff was one of my students she had already been a Twitter user, and so she didn't change her login for this class, so we were getting stuff about romanticism and then stuff about, oh, my boyfriend's such a douche, and you know, and I finally had to say in class, I said, you need to get a new account or you need to stop doing that because we're reading all of your feeds. And she was like, oh, really? You can see that? And it was that moment of getting them to recognize what's visible and what, you know, who they are online. Right?
But they wouldn't mind saying that any other place. That's what I find fascinating.
Right.
People will say the most outrageous and perfectly private things on Facebook for their friends.
Right.
And they have there are no boundaries and there's no inhibition.
Right.
But when it comes to writing for people in a class, I think they think, oh, well, this student is going to judge me as not being as smart as she is, or that my answer isn't as good as hers.
But I think that's in part what's really nice about, I mean, one of the possibilities of using these things is that it actually helps us show them the rhetorical moves that they're doing in a broad field to say, like, this is how people are seeing you outside of the class too. Is that okay with you?
Yeah.
And then they start to decide whether they want to rein in their personality, you know, their online presence or whatever. And so it's, at least from my standpoint, it's kind of nice to say maybe you don't want to be posting that all over the internet, right?
And on the other side, I mean, with the blog posts, having public blogs, I would have students write a post on, I'll have them do semiotic analyses of an ad for some Samsung device, and then someone from China or London will write and be like, hey, I really love that device. I disagree with your reading of this ad. You know, but what a great thing. I mean, we talk about audience, but it's real. It's not just me giving them a grade.
Right.
I mean, it's out there, and and when it happens in that completely spontaneous way, I think it really teaches a good lesson.
You know, it's interesting that this presentation is taking place today about promises and pitfalls, because social media changed the government in Egypt, you know, and so to frame what we're doing in the classroom for our students, to say, look, this has world-changing potential. Look at what happened, you know, and so I think that helps to say how really important this is, and what potential it has.
Yeah, and what our role is. I mean, I just to respond to that earlier point, for the first time this semester, I said no texting in class. I've never done that before this semester because I did feel like that was getting to a place where it was distracting to me. And so I mean I do have certain ambivalences about the new media technologies. I'm not sort of throwing myself into it, we do need to make careful decisions as we teach, but we're also responsible for what do we allow and not allow, and how do we rethink that rapidly.
Can you reload the Wikipedia site to see if they edited it?
Sure.
And can you all tell us about the presentation software?
Yeah, this.
Oh, yeah.
One other question while he's loading.
Yeah.
How can you control for them just wandering off and exploring other things?
When?
It's gone.
It's gone.
It's gone. I told you.
Now Loyola is in the.
Well, now Chris is
So,
on the list.
but so this is perfect, right? I mean, what a great moment! You probably.
There's a reason I don't edit this.
Why?
Because he'll be on the watch list.
Really?
Chris is like, what did I just sign up for?
It's a nationalist or.
But I mean, what a great.
Nationalist or somebody paid by the government to police the
Wow.
sites.
So they're looking at this site all the time?
Well, they probably have it on their.
Well, we could see who edited it. I mean, I'm actually not anonymous, so they know who
Oh,
edited
wait,
it.
you're signing to your own name.
Oh yeah.
Oh.
I don't believe in the anonymity of Wikipedia. I think it's.
Okay, who edited it?
Let's see. Oh, I guess we.
What was your
I
question
thought the
again?
Chinese version
Control
would get
and show
edited
not
instantly,
wandering.
but I didn't realize
In
the English
class?
one.
Yeah.
Like when they have the devices? We can't, that's one of the problems we found, is that we do notice that they
Yeah,
wander.
because I just, there's nothing, no cell phones, no laptops, nothing.
Right.
I went for notebooks.
Yeah, I don't do that. I actually let them have whatever they're gonna have, and if I don't feel like they're paying attention, I call them out on it.
Yeah.
Which doesn't distract me, maybe probably because I'm a little distractible usually anyway. That's kind of how I operate. But in the iPad class in particular, we do notice that students are always kind of looking for different apps. I mean, even the other day in class, we were having this really intense discussion about the end of the Benjamin work of art in the age of mechanical reproduction. And then one student found that there was a Catholic confessional app.
Just came out.
And they went, "Woo!" And the whole class just stopped. And they were like, oh my God. And then they're like, oh, it's 99 cents. Okay, anyway, Benjamin. Yeah.
I mentioned this though.
What?
It's funny because I mentioned this the other day in class, this app we
Yeah.
were talking about.
Oh yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry.
it's very interesting.
Yeah, so I mean, to answer your question, I haven't figured out the balance yet.
One thing I know about Blogger, I love Blogger. It works on almost any mobile device.
Yeah.
Which is great. And the other
iPad's
thing,
sometimes tricky, but
Right.
you got to be in the edit HTML mode to
but the
do
other
anything.
thing is, that I think it encourages students to be interdisciplinary. I mean, you can put images in it so easily. You can embed media
Mhm.
in it so easily. They
I
can
wonder if
think
they
more
never-
than with just
No,
words,
they do
which I like.
Mhm. Yeah.
I might suggest that if you do it again, to try WordPress.
We actually did. That's funny you say that. We have a WordPress site for this
Uh-huh.
course now.
Yeah.
And the problem is it's not function because it's also Comment Press connected, and it's not functioning properly
On the
in
iPad.
everybody's browser and on iPad, and so we can't
Yeah.
get
The
to
Blogger's
it.
better
So actually, we
across.
just yesterday switched back to our old blog.
Interesting.
So yeah, and we Tumblr is great too, except it
Yeah.
doesn't allow
Yeah.
multi-users the way
WordPress
that
is more
Blocker
powerful,
does.
but it's
Yeah,
not
the
as-
reason I suggest that is
Yeah.
because
check
you
the
can
link
take
it
all
over.
that, and if
Oh,
it's
yeah.
significant, you can export it and serve it yourself,
Right.
and modify it.
Right.
You know, it just has a
Where?
greater future.
Yeah.
If
Yeah.
you see where it says
We did have to
browse
find a
history
server though.
from year
to put it
and
on
earlier
first.
Of course, but you can always just
all
have it on your
deleted
computer
only.
until you find it.
Right. I
You
mean,
can
we did
archive
find
it
one,
in a
but-
more robust way.
Thanks, Mary.
So you're not finding who's made the
Wikipedia is
changes?
actually hosted in China.
I think it's February 11th. It's today 11th. Yeah.
I mean, this was obviously a charged topic, but I mean, a great teaching moment for Ryan's class. I mean, and I think I think that's the point. Like whether making a contribution or an edit to Wikipedia results in a prompt deletion or a flurry of other minor edits from people all over, or if it's just a sparkling addition that then you can say, oh, nice job, you just added an important sentence to that entry for a certain poem. I think it's. Do we see anything here? Are these are all going on
What time is it?
right now? Yeah.
Where's our time?
Um,
Can you find your username?
oh yeah, that's a good idea, isn't it?
So this is for all of Wikipedia?
No, this is just for this article.
Well, there's something about
That doesn't make
NCAA
sense.
men's
Yeah,
division.
Cheetah High School, USA Women's 7.
Oh, you're right. Well, wait a minute. Let's just do a find and do my name, and then it'll come up.
It's probably on page 342.
Well, were there any other questions?
Yeah,
Or otherwise you can go home and enjoy the weekend.
Ryan, we'll put you on this, on the case here. And if I'm not here tomorrow, we'll know why. Yeah, this is, wait, did we talk about Prezi?
No, we didn't.
Prezi is a great, we use this site called Prezi to make this presentation. It's totally free, it's all online.
In the cloud.
Like we built it back in our office and just come up and pull it up here. With your EDU email address, you get a really like a decent version of it for free, and it's an interesting new. Well, I don't know how new, but it's an interesting way to present material, especially in the new media landscape where we're always thinking of issues of like proximity and like the face-to-face question. What does that mean now? Anyway, sorry.
Thank you. It's always